The dates which these two men lived and died are of great importance, dealing with the plays and their connection to Sir Francis Bacon. Let's begin with medicine in Shakespeare. Statement made by Orville Owen, MD. Here I make an extraordinary statement, which is, if William Shakespeare wrote the plays bearing his name, he discovered the circulation of the blood instead of Dr. William Harvey. And further, if Shakespeare wrote the plays, Harvey stole the discovery from Shakespeare, which is, of course, nonsense. Dr. William Harvey took his literary degree at Cayas College, Cambridge, and his medical degree at the Great School of Medicine at Padua. In the year 1615, Harvey was appointed Lumleian Professor at Bartholomew Hospital, and in the latter part of 1616, Dr. Harvey made his first discovery of blood circulation, but did not make it public until the year 1619, when he published a little monograph upon the subject. Keep in mind, William Shakespeare of Stratford died in 1616. With accusations of witchcraft still being a possible threat, it was not until the year 1628 that Harvey became fully sure the world was ready for the announcement. In that year he published the work which makes him famous at the present day. As the 1623 folio is the only edition having all the so-called Shakespeare plays, we will use it as the basis of comparison. Knowledge of blood circulation is evident in Coriolanus, Romeo and Juliet, Love's Labour's Lost, Twelfth Night, The Winter's Tale, Merchant of Venice, All's Well That Ends Well, King John, As You Like It. Reading quotations from these plays with their references to arteries, veins, inferior veins, spirits run through the veins, pulse surcease, purple distilling liquor blush, nimble spirits through the arteries, etc. The playwright unquestionably displays knowledge of blood circulation. Keep in mind, Shakespeare, 1616, was in his grave, and Dr. Harvey didn't make public his first little monograph on blood circulation until 1619, but would, of course, been conducting his circulation experiments in front of university students. This is a telling extract from a document signed by Sir Francis Bacon, who witnessed one of Dr. Harvey's experiments. I have oft seen Dr. William Harvey, the new doctor from Padua at Bartholomew Hospital, in the presence of the learned doctors, force a purple distilling liquor through the veins of a dead body, and after it had descended to the heart, liver, and lungs, the blood-coloured liquor returneth again to the face, which black and full of blood, or pale, meagre, and bloodless before, doth blush and beautify, as if with life. You would think the body breathed. The very lip is warm to look upon. But we are mocked with art, as there is no pulse gainst the finger, and though the arteries seem full, yet no life is present. The legs, waist, arms, hands, brow, and limbs seem alive, but we can never ransom nature. This written eyewitness account of one of Dr. Harvey's experiments proves beyond doubt Bacon was aware of blood circulation features as are described in the Shakespeare plays. Love's Labour's Lost. By common consent, this play is ranked as one of the earliest of the Shakespeare dramas. The scene is laid at the court of Navarre and in precisely those regions of France which Francis Bacon had visited 1576 to 1579 during his residence abroad. French professor Abel Lefranc though not arguing for the authorship of Francis Bacon, has made a very special study of this play. Lefranc states that it is apparent the author of Love's Labour's Lost knew and had visited the court of Navarre. He also states that many of the allusions cannot be fully understood unless the reader is acquainted with the memoirs of Margaret de Valois, the then Princess of France. This is extremely important because it proves the author of the play had knowledge of the inner history of the court of Navarre. Also, the character of Amado identifies with Antonio Perez, an intimate friend of the Bacons. He was a Spaniard who for a while gained favour at the English court. More evidence supporting Love's Labour's Lost connection. The name in Anthony Bacon's passport. Not long after Anthony Bacon's return to England in 1592, following a 9-year stay at Navarre, Love's Labour's Lost saw its first private performance at his Bishopsgate house, well in advance of the play's first publication in 1598. 4 of the play's primary characters are named Dumaine, Longueville, Byron and Boyet. Anthony Bacon's passport, currently residing in the British Museum, contains 4 distinct signatures: Dumaine, Longueville, Baron and Boyet. Other than his brother Francis, who else would have had access to the passport? The only rational explanation for how the 4 names later came to appear in Love's Labour's Lost is that the collaborating Bacon brothers put them there. Measure for measure. Mr. E.J. Castle, QC, considered this play to display much legal knowledge. He says, throughout the whole play, we find traces of it being the work of one thoroughly acquainted with legal proceedings. In other words, these plays could by no possibility have been written by any layman. They give details taken from the life of a practicing lawyer. It is impossible to exaggerate the importance of this fact. It virtually fixes the authorship on Francis Bacon. King John. A Professor Bengough made a detailed analysis and comparison of the play King John and Francis Bacon's History of Henry VII. The results convinced him that the same mind was responsible for both works. To quote a few sentences from this article: parallel use of quaint words strikes one as peculiar. Example: tickling, coop, brag, copy, gall, prate, parley, cincture, underprop. Henry VII contains a dozen such words, of which the quaint use receives perfect illustration from as many lines scattered over the play. Of 22 metaphors in both King John and Bacon's Henry VII history, at least 12 of these metaphors are rather unusual, some very much so, and that any short works by 2 different authors should contain them all is beyond the doctrine of chance. Othello. In connection with the publication of Othello, we have strong evidence that the Stratfordian Shakespeare could not possibly have been the author. Othello was virtually the same play as the Moor of Venice, produced before the court on the 1st of November 1604. In 1613, it is performed again as part of the marriage festivities of King James's daughter, Princess Elizabeth. However, no printed version is known prior to the quarto of 1622. This was not a pirated edition, since the publisher states that he obtained his copy from the master of the revels. 1 year later, the 1623 folio was published. Othello is seen to contain some 160 new lines, besides extensive emendations by the hand of the author. Yet the presumed author, William Shakespeare, died in 1616. Richard III. This play, first printed in 1597, appeared in 1622. Yet in the very next year, 1623, we find the folio version giving no less than 193 fresh lines, besides some 2,000 minor emendations of text. How is this possible? William Shakespeare of Stratford had been 7 years in his grave. Henry VI. Parts 1 and 2 of this play are known to have existed as early as 1587, which is just about the time that the young Shakespeare was trudging up to London to seek a living. Moreover, included in the 3 parts of Henry VI, there are 30 scenes in London, 20 in France, in the very provinces visited by Bacon, 3 at St. Albans, his ancestral home, 1 at the Temple, familiar to him as a lawyer, and 1 in Parliament, also familiar to him from the year 1584 onwards. A very remarkable fact with regard to Henry VI, Part 1, occurs in Act 3, Scene 3. It is the interview in the open field between Joan of Arc and the Duke of Burgundy, where the eloquent pleading of the maid overcomes all resistance on the part of the Duke. Historically, no such interview ever took place. However, in France 1780, a well-known historian of the House of Burgundy, a Monsieur Brugière de Berante, found in the archives a letter dated July the 17th, 1429. It was addressed to the then reigning Duke. It contains a passionate appeal from Joan of Arc to the Duke to take precisely the same course of action which is urged upon him in the play. The existence of this letter was unknown in Elizabethan England. Neither Hall nor Holinshed nor any other English chronicler of that period mentions it, and yet this identical letter opened the series of negotiations that finally resulted in the Treaty of Peace in 1435, as represented in the play. The dramatist has simply changed its form. A spoken address in the open field is better suited to stage effects rather than a letter. Francis Bacon, while living overseas, is known to have visited the battlefields and the archives of France and Burgundy. Also, like so many of the Shakespeare plays, Henry VI is replete with legal technicalities. Merry Wives. Dr. Cayas, this ridiculous character in the play, was drawn from life. The prototype was Dr. John Cayas of Cambridge University, a physician, the founder of Gonville Hall, which still in part bears his name, and his reputation with the students as an exceedingly choleric and revengeful instructor. His true name was Kaye, Kaye, but as he had been educated abroad and was inclined to ape foreign manners, he changed his English name into its Latin form, Caius. To complete the likeness between the two characters, dramatic and historical, we find that 1. Both were physicians, 2. Both came from abroad, 3. Both were phenomenally quarrelsome, even to the extent of inflicting chastisement upon others with their own hands. 4. Both hated Welshmen. Dr. John Caius died in July 1573. Therefore, 9 years old William Shakespeare, living in Stratford, could not possibly have known him. On the other hand, Francis Bacon, who entered the university in April 1573, 3 months before Dr. Cayas' death, would be well aware of Dr. Cayas' reputation. The Merchant of Venice and the name Anthony. The name Anthony occurs in no less than 8 of the plays. Antonio in The Merchant of Venice figures as a generous, devoted brother. In 1598, when Francis Bacon was in financial difficulties and was actually seized and imprisoned at the instance of a Jewish creditor, Anthony Bacon came to his assistance and did everything in his power to help. This imprisonment occurred shortly before the date usually assigned for the writing of this play. The Winter's Tale. Always a student and lover of nature, Bacon diligently experimented upon the nature of plants, flowers, and fruits. He knew the proper seasons for growth and was adept at the art of grafting to produce new varieties. When Bacon's essay on gardens and the play The Winter's Tale are read together, written as they both are in that singular style of elegance, brevity, and beauty and depth of science, which is so markedly characteristic of Bacon, whether in verse or prose, it becomes next to impossible to doubt who wrote this play. Hamlet. Excerpt from Francis Bacon as Shakespeare, written by Edwin Reed, 1902. The tragedy of Hamlet was written in or about 1586, but not printed until 1603. In this first draft of the play, we find this quote. Act 2, Scene 2. Doubt that an earth is fire, doubt that the stars do move, doubt truth to be a liar, but do not doubt I love. First line. Doubt that in earth is fire. The belief in the existence of a mass of molten matter at the centre of the earth was then, as it is now, universal. But for some reason, the author of the play changed his mind. Within 1 year after the play was published, the second edition of Hamlet came from the press in 1604. Then the first line of the stanza already quoted was made to read as follows. Doubt that the stars are fire. The doctrine of a central fire in the earth was thus taken out of the play, sometime between the appearance of the first edition in 1603 and that of the second in 1604. How can this be accounted for? Francis Bacon wrote a tract in the latter part of 1606 entitled Cogitations de Natura Rerum. In this tract, evidently a fresh study of the subject, Bacon boldly took the ground that the earth is a cold body, cold to the core, and only cold body, as he afterwards affirmed, in the entire universe, all others, sun, planets, and stars, being of fire. It appears then that Bacon adopted this new view of the earth's cold interior at precisely the same time that the author of Hamlet did, and it went against unanimous opinion of physicists throughout the world. There are several coincidences linking Bacon to Hamlet, but I'll give just one more. Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 1, the grave scene. In the first known edition of Hamlet, 1603, alas poor Yorick is said to have been dead 12 years. In the 1604 quarto, printed the following year, the playwright has amended 12 years to having been dead 23 years. Why the change 1 year later? A possible explanation is this. King Henry VIII's jester, John Heywood, died about 1580-81, 23 years approximately before the 1604 second edition of Hamlet. He was the last of the king's jesters, and it is recorded that the then Princess Elizabeth rewarded him for his jesting. He was still alive when she became queen in 1558. Francis Bacon, being of noble birth, would have been aware of John Heywood and may even have met him at court. Jesters were highly thought of, and John Heywood's death would not have gone unnoticed. What caused the playwright to alter the burial time for Yorick to match that of real-life jester, John Heywood? Was it a memory resurfacing? The timing is too exact to be coincidental. Tymon of Athens. Tymon of Athens was never printed in quarto and never produced on any stage before its appearance in the first folio of 1623. Contemporary literature gives no hint of its existence prior to 1623. The question may therefore be asked, if this play was written by Will Shakespeare, where was the manuscript during the period between Shakespeare's death in 1616 and its appearance 7 years later in the folio? The experience of Francis Bacon, after his fall from power, are very similar to those of Tymon in the play. He also suffered from the ingratitude of a great number of so-called friends who deserted him. Bacon fell from power in 1621, and the play Tymon is first heard of 2 years afterwards in 1623. The Tempest, a tale of a shipwreck. Francis Bacon assisted the Earls of Southampton, Pembroke and Montgomery in financing an expedition to colonize the Virginias. The ship named Sea Venture, under the command of Admiral Sir George Somers, was chartered to go out with supplies. In 1609, this ship was wrecked on the island of Bermuda, known then as the Isle of Devils. William Strachey, a passenger on board the Sea Venture, sent a detailed letter of the shipwreck back to England. It gave graphic details of the storm which drove the ship onto the rocks. Being a private letter, its contents would not have been made known to the general public. Only those who financed the expedition would have had the opportunity to read its content. Therefore, William of Stratford could not possibly have seen it. Most Shakespearean scholars agree that the Tempest was inspired by the story of the Sea Venture, and that the author must have read Strachey's letter due to the details in the play. The language used in describing the storm and breaking up of the ship, it is almost identical to that in the letter. Sir Francis Bacon is known to have read Strachey's letter. Richard II. The play Richard II had much incensed Elizabeth, and she asked Francis Bacon, being then of her learned counsel, whether there was no treason contained in it. He answered, "No, madam, for treason I cannot deliver opinion that there is any, but very much felony." The Queen asked, "How and wherein?" Bacon answered, "Because the author had stolen many of his sentences and conceits out of Cornelius Tacitus." We know that whole pages of the Annals of Tacitus were used in Richard II. The play was staged in 1597. This play was published anonymously in the first instance, and that only when the Queen was hunting for its author to rack him, the new edition of 1598 was issued with the name of William Shakespeare as author. Was this the moment to print a real author's name upon it? Bacon was the concealed author, and that his knowledge of its copying from Tacitus was an unconscious admission of the fact. Edward Johnson writes that Will Shakespeare, actor, whose name is now being used for the plays, asked to be given a house at Stratford when he went back there as a safeguard from Queen Elizabeth's wrath. Bacon knew the actor at the theatre and had come to an arrangement with him because of the similarity of his name and that of Bacon's pseudonym Shake-Spear, Pallas Athena. Shakespeare was given £1,000 and new place, which formerly belonged to Bacon's aunt, Lady Anne Russell. The deeds to the house were not formally transferred to Shakespeare until some years afterwards. Henry VIII. In the play Henry VIII, thought to be Shakespeare's last play, 4 lords, under orders from the king, relieve Cardinal Wolsey of the Great Seal of Office. They are the Earl of Shrewsbury, Earl of Northumberland, Duke of Norfolk, and the Duke of Suffolk. Historically, this is incorrect. It was well known that Cardinal Wolsey was relieved of the Great Seal by only 2 lords, the Earl of Shrewsbury and Earl of Northumberland. So what motivated the playwright to alter known historical fact? Why include a Duke of Norfolk and a Duke of Suffolk? These are 2 of the 4 nobles definitely present at Bacon's dismissal from high office, but certainly not at Wolsey's. This distortion of history is intriguing.